Commander Vincent Hartwell thought he'd seen everything in 20 years of naval service, but as his submarine surfaced off the coast of Norfolk in March 1943, what greeted him through the periscope made him question his own eyesight. Stretching beyond the horizon was an armada so vast that counting became impossible. Ships upon ships upon ships, rolling off assembly lines like automobiles from Detroit factories. The Italians weren't just losing the war, they were witnessing the birth of the most devastating maritime force in human history.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lieutenant Commander Frank Morrison had always prided himself on his ability to read the ocean. After 15 years patrolling Mediterranean waters, he could identify vessel types from miles away just by their silhouettes. But on that foggy April morning in 1943, as his reconnaissance patrol rounded Cape Hatteras, Morrison found himself staring at something that defied everything he knew about naval warfare. The fog lifted like a theater curtain, revealing what could only be described as an industrial miracle. Dozens of shipyards stretched along the American coastline, each one churning out massive cargo vessels at a pace that seemed to mock the laws of physics. Morrison grabbed his binoculars with trembling hands, trying to process the scale of what lay before him. "Sweet Mother of God," whispered Petty Officer Thomas Caldwell from behind the wheel. "How many are there, sir?" Morrison didn't answer immediately. He was too busy counting, recounting, and then giving up entirely. The ships weren't just being built, they were being mass-produced. Like loaves of bread from a bakery, like bullets from a munitions factory, like nothing he had ever witnessed in his entire career. These weren't the elegant destroyers or battleships that had dominated naval thinking for decades. These were utilitarian beasts built for one purpose, carrying cargo across hostile waters. Each vessel measured roughly 440 feet in length, capable of hauling over 10,000 tons of supplies. But it wasn't their size that stunned Morrison, it was their sheer number. The Richmond shipyard alone had 17 ways operating simultaneously. Workers swarmed over the hulls like ants, welding, riveting, painting, installing equipment with mechanical precision. What should have taken months was being accomplished in weeks. The Americans had somehow transformed shipbuilding from an art into a science, from craftsmanship into mass production. Morrison pulled out his field notebook and began documenting what he observed. At the Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard, he watched as a completed vessel slid down the ways while two more were already taking shape on adjacent slips. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost musical. Launch, build, with clockwork regularity that defied traditional naval construction. The genius lay not just in speed, but in standardization. Every ship was identical to its predecessors, same dimensions, same specifications, same capabilities. The Americans had taken Henry Ford's assembly line concept and applied it to vessels weighing thousands of tons. Components were prefabricated in factories hundreds of miles inland, then shipped to coastal yards for final assembly. Morrison observed welders working in teams, each responsible for specific sections. Where European shipyards relied on skilled craftsmen who learned their trade over decades, the Americans were training ordinary citizens in specialized tasks. A farmer from Iowa could learn to weld a particular seam in 2 weeks. A factory worker from Detroit could master the installation of specific engine components in a month. The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. While European navies were nursing their fleets, carefully preserving each vessel like precious artifacts, the Americans were treating ships as expendable commodities. They could afford to lose dozens because dozens more were already under construction. At the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, Morrison witnessed something that would haunt his dreams for years to come. A vessel that had been nothing but blueprints on Monday was sliding into the water the following Sunday. 7 days, from steel plates to seaworthy cargo ships in 1 week. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, following predetermined sequences that eliminated wasted motion. Cranes delivered prefabricated sections with surgical precision. Welding teams worked in shifts around the clock, their torches creating a constellation of sparks that turned night into artificial day. Morrison realized he was witnessing more than industrial production. He was observing the transformation of warfare itself. Naval supremacy would no longer belong to the nation with the most skilled shipbuilders or the finest naval architects. Victory would go to whoever could produce the most vessels in the shortest time. The Americans had cracked the code of maritime logistics. These cargo ships, which they called Liberty ships, were designed to be built faster than enemy submarines could sink them. It was a numbers game, and the United States was playing with mathematical precision that reduced naval warfare to basic arithmetic. As Morrison's patrol vessel moved closer to shore, he could hear the industrial symphony of construction. Hammers striking steel, engines roaring to life, cranes groaning under massive loads. The sound of an entire nation retooling itself for global war. But what truly amazed Morrison wasn't the noise or the scale, it was the people. These weren't career shipbuilders. They were ordinary Americans who had answered their country's call. Former secretaries were operating cranes. Retired teachers were reading blueprints. Farmers were welding steel plates with the same methodical care they had once applied to tending crops.
The transformation extended beyond the shipyards themselves. Entire communities had reorganized around production schedules. Restaurants stayed open 24 hours to feed the shift workers. Childcare centers operated around the clock so mothers could join the workforce. Housing developments sprouted near major yards. Temporary cities built to support this unprecedented industrial mobilization. Morrison documented conversations he overheard between workers, their casual references to impossible production targets that were being met and exceeded. They spoke of building 18 ships simultaneously at a single yard, of launching 3 vessels in 1 day, of training programs that compressed years of traditional apprenticeship into weeks of intensive instruction. The strategic brilliance was becoming clear. While European powers focused on building a few magnificent warships, the Americans were constructing a merchant marine that could sustain global operations indefinitely. These Liberty ships would carry the tanks, ammunition, food, and fuel needed to fight wars on multiple continents simultaneously. Morrison realized that what he was witnessing represented more than military production. It was the birth of American global dominance through industrial supremacy. The nation that could build the most ships could project power anywhere on Earth, could sustain allies with continuous supply lines, could replace losses faster than enemies could inflict them. As his patrol vessel completed its reconnaissance mission, Morrison took one final look at the shipyards stretching along the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, another Liberty ship was sliding down the ways into the Atlantic, ready to carry American resolve to whatever corner of the world needed it most. 3 weeks after his reconnaissance mission, Lieutenant Commander Frank Morrison found himself in a windowless briefing room deep within the Pentagon. The mahogany table before him held classified documents stamped with red ink warnings, but nothing in those files prepared him for the conversation he was about to have with Admiral Charles Brennan. Brennan was a legend in naval circles, a man who had commanded destroyers in the Great War and helped design the Pacific Fleet's strategic doctrine. His weathered face bore the marks of decades spent understanding maritime warfare, but today those experienced eyes held something Morrison had never seen before: genuine bewilderment. "Morrison, I've read your report 3 times, Brennan began, removing his reading glasses. "I need you to walk me through exactly what you witnessed at those shipyards, and I need you to be absolutely certain about your numbers." Morrison opened his field notebook, pages filled with sketches, measurements, and calculations he had made during sleepless nights following his patrol. "Admiral, at the Richmond yards alone, I documented 17 active construction ways. Each way was simultaneously building a Liberty ship. The average construction time appeared to be 4 to 6 weeks. Brennan leaned forward. 4 to 6 weeks for a 10,000-ton cargo vessel? "That's correct, sir, but some yards were achieving even faster times. At the Bethlehem Fairfield facility, I observed a vessel launched after just 18 days of construction." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Admiral's aide, Captain Robert Lawson, consulted a thick folder of intercepted communications. "Our intelligence networks confirm Morrison's observations. The Germans are reporting similar findings through their submarine periscopes. Their U-boat commanders are finding reports claiming American cargo vessels are appearing faster than they can target them." Morrison flipped to a detailed sketch in his notebook. "The key is prefabrication, Admiral. These ships aren't being built from raw materials at the yards. They're being assembled from components manufactured in factories across the country. I observed railroad cars arriving hourly with pre-welded sections, complete engine assemblies, and even finished bridge superstructures." Brennan studied the drawings with the intensity of a man trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "You're describing industrial processes that shouldn't be possible for vessels this size. The Americans have revolutionized everything we thought we knew about shipbuilding," Morrison continued. "At the Kaiser yards, I witnessed something extraordinary. They've developed modular construction techniques. The hull is built in sections: bow, stern, midship compartments, each section constructed simultaneously by different teams. Final assembly happens in a matter of days." Brennan studied the drawings with the intensity of a man trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "You're describing industrial processes that shouldn't be possible for vessels this size. The Americans have revolutionized everything we thought we knew about shipbuilding," Morrison continued. "At the Kaiser yards, I witnessed something extraordinary. They've developed modular construction techniques. The hull is built in sections: bow, stern, midship compartments, each section constructed simultaneously by different teams. Final assembly happens in a matter of days." Captain Lawson consulted another report. "Our sources inside the American labor unions indicate they're training workers in specialized tasks rather than comprehensive shipbuilding. A single worker might spend weeks perfecting the installation of one specific component system, then repeat that task on dozens of vessels." The strategic implications were becoming clear to everyone in the room. Morrison described watching shift changes at the yards, thousands of workers moving in coordinated waves, maintaining continuous construction schedules. Night shifts worked under massive floodlights that turned the coastline into a constellation of industrial activity. "The scale defies comprehension," Morrison said. "I counted over 60 Liberty ships in various stages of completion at just 3 shipyards. If similar production is occurring at facilities along the entire American coastline," Brennan completed the calculation, "they could be launching hundreds of vessels per month." The admiral walked to a large map of the Atlantic, marked with shipping lanes and known submarine patrol areas. Red pins indicated confirmed U-boat attacks, while blue markers showed Allied convoy routes. The mathematics of maritime warfare were about to change fundamentally. Morrison described the workers he had observed, not career shipbuilders, but ordinary citizens transformed into an industrial army. Former shop clerks were operating massive cranes with surprising skill. Housewives were welding steel plates with precision that matched experienced craftsmen. Elderly men who had retired from other professions were reading complex blueprints and coordinating construction sequences. They've created training programs that compress traditional apprenticeships. What once required years of experience is being taught in weeks through specialized instruction. Each worker masters a narrow set of skills, but masters them completely. Captain Lawson added details from intelligence reports. American industrial capacity has been completely reorganized around wartime production. Auto factories are manufacturing ship components. Aircraft plants are producing marine engines. The entire civilian economy has become a weapons production system. The conversation turned to quality concerns. Traditional naval wisdom held that rapid construction meant compromised durability, but Morrison's observations suggested otherwise. The standardized designs eliminated many variables that caused structural problems. Every weld was identical to thousands of others. Every component was tested and proven before installation. Morrison described watching sea trials of recently completed Liberty ships. Despite their rapid construction, the vessels performed admirably. Their simple, robust design prioritized functionality over elegance, reliability over sophistication. "These ships are built to carry cargo across hostile waters," Morrison said. "They're not meant to be graceful or impressive. They're meant to survive submarine attacks, deliver their cargo, and make return voyages. Everything else is irrelevant." Admiral Brennan studied production photographs Morrison had managed to capture during his reconnaissance. The images showed assembly line efficiency applied to massive steel structures. Workers moved with choreographed precision, following predetermined sequences that eliminated wasted motion or redundant effort. The briefing room fell silent as the full implications settled over the assembled officers. American industrial capacity wasn't just supporting the war effort. It was redefining the strategic balance of global maritime power. Nations that spent years carefully crafting individual warships were competing against a country that could mass-produce merchant vessels like manufactured goods. Morrison described the logistics networks supporting this production miracle. Railroad systems had been reorganized to prioritize shipyard deliveries. Steel mills operated at maximum capacity, their output flowing directly to coastal construction facilities. Specialized factories produced nothing but marine equipment: engines, winches, navigation instruments, communication systems. "The Americans have solved the fundamental problem of naval warfare," Morrison concluded. "They can build ships faster than anyone can sink them. It's not about having the best vessels anymore, it's about having the most vessels."
Captain Lawson presented intercepted German communications expressing similar conclusions. U-boat commanders were reporting target-rich environments where destroying one cargo vessel meant 2 more were already en route. Submarine warfare, which had nearly strangled Britain in previous years, was becoming mathematically futile against American production capacity. The meeting concluded with Admiral Brennan assigning Morrison to continue monitoring American shipbuilding activities. The intelligence gathered would help Allied forces understand and potentially replicate these revolutionary construction techniques. As Morrison left the Pentagon that evening, he carried with him the knowledge that he had witnessed more than industrial production. He had observed the moment when American manufacturing supremacy began reshaping the global balance of power, one Liberty ship at a time. Captain Giuseppe Ferretti had commanded submarines in the Mediterranean for 8 years, but nothing in his experience prepared him for the intelligence briefing he received in Naples during the summer of 1943. The wooden conference table in the underground bunker was covered with photographs, intercepted radio transmissions, and reconnaissance reports that painted a picture so extraordinary that Ferretti initially dismissed them as Allied propaganda. Colonel Antonio Marchesi, head of Italian naval intelligence, spread the documents across the table with the methodical precision of a man delivering a death sentence. "Captain, what you're about to see will fundamentally change how we understand this war." The first photograph showed the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard from an aerial perspective. Ferretti studied the image through a magnifying glass, counting construction ways, analyzing the geometric patterns of steel and concrete that stretched along the American coastline. What he saw defied everything he understood about naval construction. This single facility, Marchesi explained, is simultaneously building 47 Liberty ships. 47, Captain! Our largest shipyard in Genoa can accommodate 6 vessels at maximum capacity. Ferretti examined additional photographs from other American yards. The scale was incomprehensible. At the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation, he counted launching ways packed so densely that completed vessels seemed to emerge from the water like schools of fish. The Permanent Metals Corporation showed similar density, with massive cranes moving prefabricated sections in perfectly choreographed sequences. "How is this possible?" Ferretti asked, though he suspected the answer would challenge everything he believed about maritime engineering. Marchesi consulted a thick folder of intelligence reports gathered from various sources, submarine observations, intercepted communications, and testimonies from captured American sailors. They've abandoned traditional shipbuilding entirely. These Liberty ships are manufactured, not built. The Colonel produced blueprints obtained through covert operations. Unlike Italian naval designs that emphasized individual craftsmanship and unique specifications, the Liberty ship plans showed mechanical precision. Every measurement was standardized, every component interchangeable, every process reduced to repeatable procedures. "Study these specifications," Marchesi instructed. "Simple, robust, designed for rapid assembly rather than aesthetic appeal. The Americans have sacrificed elegance for efficiency, craftsmanship for speed." Ferretti traced the blueprints with his finger, noting the modular design philosophy. The ship's structure was divided into sections that could be manufactured independently, then assembled like components of a massive machine. Hull sections, deck plates, superstructure elements, each piece designed to fit with mathematical precision. The intelligence reports contained details that seemed impossible. At the Richmond shipyard, American workers had launched 3 Liberty ships in a single day. The record for fastest construction belonged to a vessel called the SS Robert E. Peary, assembled in just 4 days and 15 hours from keel laying to launch. 4 days, Ferretti repeated, studying the documentation. "We require 4 months for vessels half this size." Marchesi nodded grimly. "The Americans have industrialized warfare itself. While we focus on building superior individual vessels, they're producing adequate vessels in overwhelming quantities." The captain examined photographs of American workers, noting their surprising diversity. Women operated welding equipment with apparent expertise. Elderly men read complex technical drawings while supervising construction sequences. Young workers fresh from farms and factories performed specialized tasks with mechanical precision. They've created a shipbuilding army, Ferretti observed, not skilled craftsmen, but trained specialists, each perfecting narrow tasks.
The intelligence revealed training programs that compressed traditional apprenticeships into intensive courses. American shipyards operated schools that could transform inexperienced workers into competent specialists within weeks. The curriculum focused on specific skills rather than comprehensive knowledge. Welding particular seams, installing specific equipment, operating designated machinery. Marchese presented production statistics that painted a devastating strategic picture. American shipyards were launching an average of 3 Liberty ships daily across all facilities. With construction programs expanding, projections indicated this rate would double within months. Consider mathematics, the colonel said. If American submarines sink 10 of our cargo vessels monthly, but American yards launch 90 new vessels in the same period, the strategic balance shifts irrevocably in their favor. Ferretti studied maps showing global shipping lanes, marked with projected American convoy routes. The Liberty ships weren't just cargo vessels, they were the foundation of a logistics network that could sustain military operations anywhere on Earth. Each ship could carry tanks, ammunition, fuel, and supplies sufficient to equip entire divisions. The captain examined intelligence reports describing the industrial ecosystem supporting Liberty ship production. Steel mills in Pittsburgh operated continuously, their output flowing directly to coastal shipyards. Factories in Detroit manufactured marine engines using automotive production techniques. Aircraft plants in California produced navigation equipment and communication systems. The entire American industrial base has been converted to military production, Marchese explained. Every factory, every worker, every resource focused on overwhelming their enemies through sheer productive capacity. Ferretti discovered details about the workforce transformation. American women had entered shipbuilding in unprecedented numbers, performing tasks traditionally reserved for men. They operated cranes, read blueprints, managed construction schedules, and supervised teams of workers with remarkable competence. The intelligence files contained intercepted conversations between American yard supervisors, discussing production targets that seemed fantastical. Plans called for launching 1 Liberty ship every 8 hours at major facilities. Construction schedules assumed workers would maintain this pace indefinitely, supported by continuous shifts and unlimited resources. They're not just building ships, Ferretti realized. They're building a maritime empire through industrial dominance. The captain studied photographs of completed Liberty ships departing American ports, loaded with military cargo and escorted by destroyer groups. These vessels represented more than transportation. They embodied American determination to project power globally through overwhelming logistical superiority. Marchese presented the final element of his intelligence briefing: projections for total Liberty ship production. Conservative estimates suggested the Americans would complete over 2,700 vessels by war's end. More aggressive projections approached 3,000 ships, a merchant fleet larger than all other maritime nations combined. "Captain, we're not fighting a traditional naval war anymore," the colonel concluded. "We're competing against an industrial system that treats ships as expendable commodities. They can afford to lose dozens because hundreds more are under construction." Ferretti closed the intelligence files, understanding that everything he had learned fundamentally altered Italian strategic calculations. Traditional naval doctrines emphasized preserving vessels, carefully husbanding resources, maximizing the effectiveness of limited assets. The Americans had adopted the opposite philosophy, accepting losses while maintaining overwhelming replacement capacity. As the briefing concluded, Ferretti realized he had witnessed intelligence that marked the end of one era of naval warfare and the beginning of another. Victory would no longer belong to nations with the most skilled sailors or the finest ships, but to those with the greatest industrial capacity. The Liberty ships represented more than American engineering. They embodied a new form of warfare, where manufacturing capability determined strategic outcomes. In underground bunkers throughout Italy, military planners were beginning to understand that they weren't just fighting the American Navy, they were competing against the entire American industrial system, and that was a battle no traditional maritime power could win. Margaret Donovan had never imagined she would spend her 40th birthday welding steel plates in a shipyard that never slept. 6 months earlier, she had been managing a small accounting firm in Portland, Oregon. Now she stood on the deck of a half-completed Liberty ship at 3 in the morning, her welding torch casting dancing shadows across the skeletal framework that would soon carry American supplies across the Atlantic. The transformation hadn't been voluntary. When her husband James received his draft notice in February 1943, Margaret faced a choice that millions of American women confronted: find work that supported the war effort or struggle to maintain her household on a soldier's pay. The Kaiser shipyards offered something unprecedented: wages equal to men's salaries for women willing to learn industrial trades. Margaret's welding partner, Dorothy Chen, adjusted her protective mask before beginning another seam. Dorothy's husband ran a small restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, but the war had changed everything. Their eldest son was fighting in the Pacific, while their younger children stayed with relatives so Dorothy could work the night shift. Another section completed, Dorothy announced, inspecting their work with the critical eye she had developed over months of repetitive precision. That's hull plate 47 tonight. The numbers told their own story. Margaret and Dorothy were part of a crew responsible for completing one specific section of each Liberty ship's hull. Their team could finish this task on 3 vessels per week, meaning they personally contributed to launching over 150 cargo ships annually. Multiply that by thousands of similar teams, and the scale of American production became comprehensible. Around them, the shipyard operated with mechanical precision that transformed human beings into components of a vast industrial machine. Crane operators like Helen Rodriguez worked 12-hour shifts, moving prefabricated sections with surgical accuracy. Helen had learned to operate equipment weighing several tons after just 2 weeks of intensive training, but the physical and mental demands were relentless. The human cost extended beyond individual exhaustion. Margaret observed how the work changed people. Sarah Mitchell, a former librarian, now supervised a team of riveters with military efficiency. Her gentle demeanor had hardened into focused determination, her vocabulary peppered with technical terms that would have been foreign 6 months earlier. The shipyard's medical station treated injuries that reflected this industrial transformation. Dr. William Barnes, the facility's physician, documented burns from welding accidents, cuts from metal edges, and respiratory problems from continuous exposure to industrial fumes. But he also treated a more subtle condition, the psychological strain of maintaining impossible production schedules month after month. The workers push themselves beyond normal human limits, Dr. Barnes explained to Margaret during a routine health inspection. They understand that every day of delay means American soldiers somewhere lack the supplies they need to survive.
This understanding drove behavior that bordered on obsessiveness. Margaret watched welders work through minor injuries rather than take time for proper medical attention. She saw crane operators refuse breaks during critical construction phases. The entire workforce had internalized the mathematical relationship between their productivity and battlefield outcomes. The social dynamics within the shipyard reflected broader changes in American society. Margaret worked alongside women who had never held paying jobs, immigrants learning English while mastering industrial skills, and elderly men who had emerged from retirement to contribute their experience. Traditional social boundaries dissolved under the pressure of wartime production. Ruth Washington, an African-American woman from Alabama, operated a rivet gun with precision that impressed even veteran shipbuilders. 6 months earlier, Ruth had been cleaning houses for wealthy families in Montgomery. Now she earned wages that allowed her to send money home while supporting her children in Portland. The war had created opportunities that peacetime would never have provided. The personal sacrifices extended beyond the shipyard itself. Margaret's daughter, Patricia, now 14, assumed household responsibilities that would normally fall to adults. Patricia managed grocery shopping, prepared meals for the family, and helped younger siblings with schoolwork. Entire family structures reorganized around industrial production schedules. Margaret discovered that her accounting background provided unexpected advantages in shipbuilding. She naturally understood the importance of precise measurements, quality control procedures, and systematic documentation. Her welding partner, Dorothy, applied organizational skills learned from restaurant management to coordinate team workflows and material logistics. The transformation wasn't limited to individual workers. Entire communities restructured themselves around shipyard operations. Local restaurants extended hours to serve workers on all shifts. Childcare centers operated around the clock to accommodate parents working irregular schedules. Housing developments sprouted near major facilities, temporary neighborhoods built specifically for defense workers. Margaret lived in one such development. Rows of identical housing units constructed rapidly to accommodate the massive workforce. Her neighbors included families from across the country who had migrated to coastal areas for shipyard employment. Regional accents from Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas mixed with local dialects, creating linguistic diversity that reflected the national mobilization effort. The physical demands of shipbuilding required adaptations that went beyond technical training. Margaret developed calluses that would have horrified her 6 months earlier, muscle strength she never knew she possessed, and tolerance for industrial noise that would have been unbearable in her previous life. Dorothy Chen faced additional challenges as a Chinese American in a workforce still adjusting to ethnic diversity. Some workers initially questioned her loyalty or competence, but her consistent performance and obvious dedication gradually earned acceptance. The shared hardship of demanding work created bonds that transcended racial and ethnic boundaries. The psychological impact extended beyond individual adaptation. Margaret observed how the work environment fostered a collective sense of purpose that united people from vastly different backgrounds. Former secretaries, farmers, teachers, and housewives found common ground in their contribution to maritime production that would determine the war's outcome. Letters from overseas reinforced this sense of purpose. Margaret's husband James wrote about Liberty ships arriving in European ports, their cargo holds filled with the tanks, ammunition, and supplies that enabled Allied advances. Every weld Margaret completed, every section Dorothy assembled, eventually translated into tactical advantages on distant battlefields. The shipyard operated its own training programs that continuously upgraded workers' skills. Margaret attended evening classes on advanced welding techniques, while Dorothy learned blueprint reading and quality control procedures.
The American workforce was not only producing ships at unprecedented rates, it was simultaneously educating itself to maintain and improve these production standards. As Margaret finished her shift that morning, walking through the shipyard gates as dawn broke over the Pacific, she carried with her the knowledge that she had become part of something larger than individual survival. She was a component in the industrial system that was reshaping global warfare, one welded seam at a time. The human cost was real: exhaustion, injury, family disruption, social upheaval. But so was the human contribution: millions of ordinary Americans transforming themselves into the workforce that would build victory through overwhelming industrial capacity. Captain Edward Thornton stood on the deck of the SS Benjamin Franklin as it approached the bomb-scarred docks of Liverpool in October 1943. This was his 8th Atlantic crossing aboard a Liberty ship, and each voyage had reinforced his understanding that these vessels represented more than cargo transportation. They were the lifeline connecting American industrial might to the global battlefield.
Benjamin Franklin's manifesto told a story of American productive capacity that would have been impossible to imagine 2 years earlier. Her holds contained 3,200 tons of steel ingots from Pittsburgh foundries, 1,800 Sherman tanks fresh from Detroit assembly lines, 500,000 rounds of artillery ammunition manufactured in plants across the Midwest, and enough medical supplies to equip field hospitals for an entire Army division. As longshoremen began the unloading process, Thornton watched British officials document each item with expressions that mixed gratitude with amazement. Commander Peter Ashworth of the Royal Navy approached the ship's manifest with the methodical precision of someone who understood that these deliveries were determining the outcome of battles being fought across multiple continents. "Captain, this single cargo load contains more armored vehicles than our entire tank production for the past 3 months," Ashworth observed, reviewing the shipping documents. "How many vessels like this are crossing the Atlantic monthly?" Thornton consulted his shipping schedules, documents that revealed the scope of the maritime supply chain connecting America to its allies. "Commander, the Benjamin Franklin is one of 47 Liberty ships that departed American ports in the past week alone. Similar convoys are departing every 7 days." The mathematical implications were staggering. If each Liberty ship carried comparable cargo loads, American deliveries to British ports were exceeding Britain's own production capacity by factors that defied traditional economic understanding. The war had become a contest between American manufacturing and Axis military capabilities. Ashworth led Thornton through Liverpool's expanded port facilities, infrastructure that had been rapidly modified to accommodate the unprecedented volume of American cargo. New warehouses stretched along the waterfront, each one designed to process and distribute supplies arriving faster than British forces could absorb them. "We've had to completely reorganize our logistics networks," Ashworth explained, gesturing toward railroad yards packed with freight cars bound for military depots across Britain. "American supplies arrive faster than our transportation systems can distribute them to field units." The global impact extended far beyond British ports. Thornton carried intelligence reports describing similar deliveries to Soviet ports through the dangerous Murmansk convoy route. American Liberty ships braved Arctic conditions and German submarine attacks to deliver tanks, aircraft, and industrial equipment that enabled the Red Army's offensive capabilities on the Eastern Front. The captain had witnessed this global supply network firsthand during previous voyages. At the port of Archangel, he observed Soviet dock workers unloading American-built locomotives that would transport supplies along the Trans-Siberian Railway. In Mediterranean ports, Liberty ships delivered equipment that supported Allied operations in North Africa and Italy. Each delivery represented strategic calculations that went beyond immediate military needs. American industrial planners were essentially equipping multiple armies simultaneously, maintaining supply lines that stretched across 3 oceans while supporting Allied forces on 6 different fronts. Thornton's crew included merchant sailors who had served on Liberty ships throughout the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean routes. Chief Engineer Robert Murphy had delivered cargo to Australian ports where American supplies supported MacArthur's island-hopping campaign. Radio Officer Daniel Foster had coordinated convoy communications during runs to North African ports that sustained Montgomery's desert operations. The stories they shared revealed the global scope of American maritime logistics. Liberty ships were delivering artillery pieces to British forces in Burma, medical supplies to Free French units in Algeria, aviation fuel to American air bases in Britain, and construction equipment to military engineers building airfields across the Pacific. The cumulative effect was reshaping the strategic balance of the entire war. Nations that had struggled to maintain minimal equipment levels were suddenly operating with American-supplied abundance. British tank divisions advanced with American-built Sherman tanks. Soviet artillery units fired American-manufactured shells. Free French forces carried American weapons and wore American-produced uniforms. At Liverpool's Military Coordination Center, Thornton met with logistics officers from multiple Allied nations who were attempting to process the overwhelming flow of American supplies. Colonel Jean-Baptiste represented Free French forces, Major Ivan Petrov coordinated Soviet requirements, and Captain Willem van der Berg managed supplies for Dutch resistance operations. Each officer described the same phenomenon. American productive capacity was exceeding their ability to effectively utilize delivered materials. Soviet forces received tanks faster than they could train crews. British units accumulated ammunition stockpiles that exceeded storage capacity. Free French resistance fighters had access to weapons and communications equipment that surpassed the resources of some national armies. The Americans have solved the fundamental problem of modern warfare, Colonel Baptiste observed during a coordination meeting. They've eliminated resource scarcity as a limiting factor in military operations. This elimination of scarcity was creating strategic opportunities that had been impossible under traditional resource constraints. Allied commanders could plan offensive operations without worrying about ammunition shortages. Tank divisions could advance knowing that replacement vehicles were already crossing the Atlantic. Air forces could mount sustained bombing campaigns, confident that fuel and ordnance would arrive continuously.
Thornton examined reports describing the ripple effects of American supply deliveries. In Soviet factories, American machine tools were increasing production of indigenous weapons. British shipyards used American steel to repair damaged vessels. Australian forces employed American communications equipment to coordinate operations across the vast Pacific theater. The global impact extended beyond military applications. American agricultural products delivered by Liberty ships were preventing famine in Britain and the Soviet Union. Medical supplies were reducing disease mortality among civilian populations. Industrial raw materials were enabling Allied nations to maintain essential war production despite bombing campaigns that targeted their domestic industries. The captain met with representatives from neutral nations who described how American maritime supremacy was influencing countries not directly involved in the conflict. Sweden, Switzerland, and Spain were adjusting their policies in response to obvious American capacity to project power globally through overwhelming logistics capabilities. Portuguese officials in Liverpool described how American convoy routes were affecting their Atlantic territories. American ships required fuel and maintenance facilities at strategic locations, creating economic opportunities for neutral nations willing to support these supply chains. As the Benjamin Franklin completed her unloading operations, Thornton realized he had witnessed more than successful cargo delivery. He had observed the moment when American industrial supremacy was determining the outcome of global conflict through sheer productive, overwhelming capacity. The Liberty ships represented the transformation of warfare itself. Victory no longer belonged to nations with the finest soldiers or the most sophisticated weapons, but to those with the greatest ability to sustain continuous operations through unlimited supply delivery. Standing on Liverpool's docks, surrounded by mountains of American-produced war materials, Thornton understood that future historians would mark this moment as the point when American manufacturing capacity fundamentally altered the balance of global power. The Liberty ships weren't just delivering cargo, they were delivering American dominance to every corner of the warring world. Admiral Heinrich Krüger stood in the operations room of U-boat command in Wilhelmshaven, staring at a map that told the story of German naval defeat through stark mathematical precision. Red markers indicated confirmed U-boat kills of Allied merchant vessels, while blue pins showed the relentless stream of American Liberty ships arriving at European ports. The ratio had become impossible to ignore. It was March 1944, and the numbers painted a picture that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. German submarines had sunk 847 Allied merchant vessels since the beginning of 1943, but American shipyards had launched over 1,900 Liberty ships in the same period. The mathematics of maritime warfare had shifted irrevocably against the Reich. Captain Klaus Weber, Krüger's chief intelligence analyst, consulted the latest reports from U-boat patrols. "Admiral, our submarine commanders are reporting target saturation in the North Atlantic. They're encountering more merchant vessels than they can possibly attack." The intelligence files contained testimonies from U-boat captains that read like descriptions of maritime nightmares. Commander Hans Dietrich of U-571 had surfaced near a convoy route to discover Liberty ships stretching beyond the horizon in both directions. His submarine carried 14 torpedoes, but he counted over 60 cargo vessels in a single convoy. "The Americans have achieved something we didn't believe possible," Krüger admitted, studying photographs of New York Harbor taken by long-range reconnaissance aircraft. The images showed dozens of Liberty ships anchored in formation, waiting for convoy assignments. "They've made merchant vessels expendable," Weber presented. Calculations that demonstrated the futility of continued submarine warfare against American supply lines. Even if German U-boats achieved impossible success rates, sinking every merchant vessel they encountered, American production would still exceed German destruction capabilities by substantial margins. The admiral examined intercepts of American radio communications, messages that revealed the casual confidence of a maritime power that was no longer worried about vessel losses. Liberty ship captains discussed torpedo attacks as temporary inconveniences rather than existential threats. Replacement vessels were already under construction before damaged ships reached port for repairs. Krüger's staff had documented the strategic implications with Prussian thoroughness. German military planners had based their entire war strategy on the assumption that sustained submarine warfare could strangle Allied supply lines. The appearance of unlimited American merchant shipping had invalidated decades of naval doctrine. The operation room's walls displayed charts showing the global reach of American maritime logistics. Liberty ships were delivering supplies to British forces in Burma, Soviet armies advancing towards Berlin, Free French units fighting in Italy, and American divisions preparing for the invasion of France. Every theater of war was being sustained by American productive capacity.
Captain Weber consulted reports from German agents operating in neutral countries, intelligence that revealed how American maritime supremacy was influencing nations not directly involved in the conflict. Swedish officials were quietly negotiating trade agreements that favored American interests. Swiss bankers were adjusting their policies to accommodate American financial dominance. Even Spanish authorities were modifying their neutral stance in recognition of obvious American power. The psychological impact on German naval personnel was becoming evident in patrol reports and crew evaluations. U-boat commanders who had once spoken confidently about strangling Allied supply lines now filed reports describing target-rich environments that exceeded their ability to effect meaningful damage.
Kruger read testimony from Commander Friedrich Eckhardt, whose U-boat had intercepted radio communications between Liberty ship convoys. The American merchant sailors discussed production schedules with the casual familiarity of factory workers. They knew exactly how many replacement vessels were under construction, when they would be completed, and where they would be deployed. They're not just transporting cargo, Kruger realized, they're operating a maritime assembly line that spans the Atlantic Ocean. The Admiral's staff had calculated that American shipyards were launching Liberty ships faster than German intelligence could track them. New vessels appeared in convoy formations before German planners had recorded their construction. The Reich's entire naval intelligence apparatus was being overwhelmed by American productive velocity. Weber presented the final element of his intelligence assessment: projections for American merchant marine capacity at war's end. Conservative estimates suggested the United States would possess over 5,000 cargo vessels by 1945, more merchant shipping than all other maritime nations combined throughout history. "Admiral, we're not fighting a traditional naval war," Weber concluded. "We're competing against an industrial system that has eliminated scarcity as a strategic factor. They can afford to lose hundreds of vessels because thousands more are under construction." Kruger studied reports describing the secondary effects of American maritime dominance. Allied forces were operating with equipment abundance that eliminated traditional resource constraints. Soviet tank divisions advanced with American-supplied vehicles. British bomber commands mounted sustained operations using American aviation fuel. Free French resistance fighters carried American weapons that exceeded the equipment of some national armies. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate military concerns. American Liberty ships were delivering industrial machinery that enabled Allied nations to increase their own production capabilities. British factories used American machine tools to manufacture weapons. Soviet plants employed American equipment to produce vehicles and ammunition. The Admiral examined photographs of European ports transformed by American cargo deliveries. Liverpool's warehouses overflowed with American supplies. Murmansk docks strained under the volume of equipment arriving via Arctic convoys. Mediterranean ports processed American material destined for multiple theaters simultaneously. German diplomatic reports confirmed that neutral nations were recognizing American maritime supremacy as a permanent strategic reality. Countries that had maintained careful neutrality were quietly adjusting their policies to accommodate obvious American power projection capabilities. Kruger's final briefing documents contained intercepts of American planning discussions for post-war reconstruction. Liberty ship production would continue after military victory, converting merchant vessels to civilian cargo transport that would establish American commercial dominance globally. The war was creating the infrastructure for American economic hegemony. As the briefing concluded, Kruger understood that he had witnessed more than military intelligence analysis. He had observed the documentation of a fundamental shift in global power relationships, achieved through industrial capacity that transformed warfare itself. The Liberty ships represented the moment when American manufacturing supremacy began reshaping international order. Nations that had dominated maritime commerce for centuries were being displaced by a country that could build ships faster than anyone could sink them. Walking through the corridors of U-boat command that evening, Admiral Kruger carried with him the knowledge that traditional naval warfare had ended. Future conflicts would be determined not by the skill of sailors or the sophistication of weapons, but by the industrial capacity to sustain unlimited operations through overwhelming productive superiority. The American Liberty ships had achieved something unprecedented in naval history. They had made the ocean itself American territory through sheer volume of vessels. Every shipping lane, every supply route, every strategic waterway was now dominated by American maritime power that no traditional naval force could challenge. The final reckoning was clear. America had won the war not through military genius or tactical innovation, but through industrial might that reduced global conflict to a simple mathematical equation. They could build faster than anyone could destroy, and that made victory inevitable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.